Good morning, students. It's another exciting day when we study the Old Testament. Today we will be focusing on the book of Deuteronomy. So far, we focused on the first four books of the Pentateuch, but now we're going to look at the fifth book, a very important book, a very important transitional book. But let's remind ourselves that the Bible is not about you, it's not about me. The Bible is about God. And in the book of Genesis, we saw God as the one who creates, as the one who blesses, as the one who promises, and intervenes when human beings mess up. He intervenes with his judgment, but he also intervenes with his grace. In the book of Exodus, we saw God as someone who delivers and instructs. And he also, of course, leads the people through the wilderness and gives directions for the construction of the tabernacle. In the third book, in the book of Leviticus, we saw God as God who is holy and who expects us to be holy. And also in the process, we learned that this God calls us to worship, calls us to come into his presence. But most importantly, this God is holy. And then in the book of Numbers, we saw a God who is faithful despite the people's lack of faithfulness. A God who is faithful and expects faithfulness. Now in the book of Deuteronomy, we're going to see God as somebody who renews the covenant. And if we were to think about the theme of this book, and I'm going to make you memorize it, the theme of this book is probably best thought about by looking at a couple of verses that I want you to memorize. So when you think about this book of Deuteronomy, think about the God also who calls you to trust and to obedience, a trust and an obedience that is based especially on Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5. And please memorize that. Shema Israel. This is in a sense the theme of the book. Shema Israel, hear, O Israel. The Lord your God is one. But again, this is an exciting book, and it's a book that takes place on the eastern side of the Jordan. Let's look a little bit at the setting of the book. Let's look briefly a little bit at the outline of the book. I want to point out to you some main theological themes that you should pay attention to. And don't forget, this is a book that is a very important book. And I'm not just to show you and to explain this, I'm just going to start with this quotation from William Tyndale. William Tyndale was one of the first translators of the Bible into the English language. Notice what he said about the book of Deuteronomy. He said this is a book worthy to be read in day and night and never to be out of hands, for it is the most excellent of all the books of Moses. This is what William Tyndale said. Now, a more recent scholar, very good Old Testament scholar, who's a bit of a specialist in the book of Deuteronomy, Daniel Block, calls the book of Deuteronomy the Gospel according to Moses. And he thinks that this was Jesus' favorite book. Why would he think that it was Jesus' favorite book? We don't know exactly, but it's probably also because Jesus, if you remember, refers to this book, quotes this book 3 times when he is tempted in the wilderness. At the same time, please don't forget, this book is one of the most quoted books, actually, of the Old Testament. It's perhaps the 5th most quoted book in the Old Testament after the book of Psalms, Isaiah, Genesis, and Exodus. So it is a very important book. And again, it concludes the Pentateuch and draws together many of its key themes. So for example, Deuteronomy brings together the patriarchal promises, the history of the Exodus and the wilderness, and also the laws given at Sinai. In fact, the book of Deuteronomy provides a theological foundation. That's why I will focus on the theology, on some theological points, because the book provides a theological foundation for the history books that follow. That's why the language of Deuteronomy is many times found in the historical books, So much so, actually, it is found in the historical books that sometimes those historical books are, that history is referred to as Deuteronomistic history. Again, most likely this is the book that was crucial in the reform started by the king Josiah in the book of 2 Kings, and at the same time is referred to by several prophets, especially Hosea and Jeremiah. But in general, I would say prophets know this book and value it very much. As I mentioned, it's frequently quoted into the New Testament. Now, one of the first things that we must understand about this book is where it takes place. And again, to understand a few things about it outline. So to understand where it takes place, let's open the Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 1. Notice how it starts. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hatzerot, and the Zabah. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. So basically, it's difficult to know all of these places where exactly they are, but we know that these are the words of Moses. So far, God has spoken, especially at Sinai, giving of the law. But now Moses, the most authoritative prophet, is going to speak to us. And in fact, this book is arranged, could be understood as giving us 3 major sermons of Moses. But more importantly than that, and it takes place, as we see from the very beginning, beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, it takes place on the other side of the Jordan in the land of Moab. So the people of Israel are still in the land of Moab. They are just about to enter the promised land. But that's where Moses is giving these speeches, these sermons, these exhortations to the people of Israel. And through these exhortations, he is encouraging them to obey God and to trust God and to choose life, therefore to choose life. But again, if we look at this book, most commentators realize that it's arranged like a suzerain treaty. A suzerain treaty, it's arranged as an ancient covenant. And again, most scholars think that the covenant, the arrangement fits best with the covenants of the Hittites from the 2nd millennium before Christ. Therefore, it makes sense that the book is attributed to Moses as the author. But usually in these covenants that we have from the ancient Near East, in these covenants, we usually have like a preamble, which is basically a brief introduction, which is what we find here in verses 1 through 5. So it's a little bit of an introduction. And after that, we have a historical prologue, where in that covenant, in that treaty, the suzerain or the king are the same, is talking to the people about what happened in the past, what he has done for the vassal. So here Moses is going to repeat to the people of Israel what God has done for them, how he carried them through the wilderness, how he rescued them from Egypt, how he helped them defeat the kings on the eastern side of Jordan. So we're going to have that historical prologue from about chapters 1 through the end of chapter 4. Usually then these covenants are followed by some stipulations. Sometimes there are some general stipulations, and sometimes those are more specific stipulations. Those stipulations are found here in the book from about chapter 5 to the end of chapter 26. Then in a covenant or in a treaty, we have what are called blessings and curses. So the suzerain king or the king says, I have done this for you. And because I have done this for you, this is what you have to do. This is what you must obey. So these are the stipulations. And if you obey the stipulations, you're going to be blessed. If you disobey, you're going to be cursed. And this is what we find later. We have some covenant. We have some specific covenant blessings and covenant curses. And this is usually also followed by a document clause where the document is saved, and usually it's in 2 copies. And then is a list of witnesses. And we find this in the book of Deuteronomy, if we look carefully. The document clause is in chapter 31, and the witnesses we find in chapter 32. But this is how the book is organized. But most importantly, what I want you to focus as you study the book, I want you to especially focus on some of the theological points that are made in this book. So I want you to focus on the following theological points. So for example, I want you to realize that one of the main theological points, or a key theme in the book, is the uniqueness of God. So again, we see that already from Deuteronomy chapter 6, the one I want you to memorize. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. But we already see that in chapter 4. So for example, if you turn with me to chapter 4, and I want you to read the whole chapter 4, 1 through 40, but especially focus on verses 5 through 8. I'm reading now from Deuteronomy 4, verses 5 through 8, to see this, the uniqueness of the God of Israel. So notice what it says here, the uniqueness of God. In verse 5, see, I have taught you statutes and rules as the God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the people, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. So actually, it's the uniqueness of God, but it's also the uniqueness of the people of Israel. So this main theme is not only the uniqueness of God, because they have a unique God, they're also a unique people. So notice here again, verses 5 through 8, especially in Deuteronomy chapter 4. And verse 7 continues. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as all this law that I said before you today? So in other words, a key theme in the book of Deuteronomy is this: Israel, you have a unique God, a God who's near you. And not only a God, if you look through the whole chapter, you will see that this is also a God who spoke. It's not like the idols, somebody who's dumb, who's mute, who cannot speak. This is a God who spoke. This is a God who's near you, and this is a God who hears. And because this is a unique God, the people of Israel are the people of God that are a unique people. So, and this brings us to the second point, which is related. So we have a unique God, it's a unique people, and this is a people which is elected. So another theme is this, the election of Israel. And again, the election of Israel can be seen in chapter 4, chapter 10, for example, if you look at 14, 15, chapter 14. But I want to look especially at chapter 7, just again to see in chapter 7 an important theme, the theme of Israel's election. So I'm going to read now from chapter 7. Pay attention to verses 6 and 8. So notice what it says here about the people of Israel, because this is an important theme, the election of Israel. Just like it's an important theme, the election, our election. So in chapter 7, verse 6, it says the following about the people of Israel. For you are a people, holy, in other words, set apart, to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasure possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It was not because you are more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Please notice here, this is the election of Israel. It's something that is repeated. And it's an election that takes place not because Israel is special, not because Israel is better or even bigger. No, it's just because God loves them and because God promised something to the patriarch, because God keeps his promises. So we have here the uniqueness of God and therefore the uniqueness of his people, the election of Israel. This is an important theme. Another thing that is repeated many times in the book is the goodness of the land. Again, here are the people of Israel on the other side of the Jordan, probably in the land of Moab, close to Mount Nebo, where Moses just died in Deuteronomy 34. And then what happens, that Moses gives this speech and is reminding the people of Israel that the land that we're going to, the promised land, is a good land. So for example, this we see from the very beginning in chapter 1, we see it in chapter 8, 7 through 13, chapter 11, 8 through 15. But let me just look in chapter 6, just to see how chapter 6 talks about the land. So let's look at chapter 6, verses 10 through 11. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Again, notice that the book brings together a series of themes. This is also the theme of the promise to the patriarchs. So when he brings you to the land that he swore to your fathers to give you, with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all good things that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Here is in the context of a warning, don't forget. But in this context, we are reminded that the people God gives you is a good land, a land with vineyards, a land with houses which you did not build, a land we of course know of milk and honey, flowing with milk and honey, the expression that appears many times. So please notice again the uniqueness of God and therefore the uniqueness of Israel, the election of Israel, the goodness of the land that God promised to Israel. Another, of course, important theme here is the faithfulness of God. The faithfulness of God. The Hebrew word for this is chesed, faithfulness. Or emunah, it's also emunah, it's also used for faithfulness. Despite Israel's sin, God keeps his promises of land made originally to Abraham. This is going to repeat again and again. You might not be faithful, we saw in the book of, even in the book of Numbers, but God is faithful. God expects faithfulness, and God is also faithful. We also see the power of God to defeat the enemies in the land. We will see, or you see, for example, in chapter 2 to chapter 3, verse 11, when Moses recounts again the history between Yahweh and his people. And in this history, God helped them defeat kings which are much stronger than they were. So this theme, watch for this theme as you read the book and as you read the readings. Watch this theme about the power of God. And also throughout the book, you will notice that this book, as I mentioned, it's like a series of sermons of Moses, 3 major sermons of Moses. And in these sermons, constantly Israel is exhorted to love the Lord. Shema Israel, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God. Of course, a commandment that is repeated by Jesus when he is asked which is the greatest commandment. It's right here in the book of Deuteronomy. So the people are exhorted to love the Lord, to serve the Lord, to fear the Lord, and to obey God. Again, this happens over and over again. And I'm just going to mention a few more important themes that are mentioned here. Of course, is the warnings. There are some warnings against idolatry. Again, this is recurring throughout the book. Here are the people of Israel, always tempted by idols. In fact, somebody said that the whole Old Testament is basically written to warn and to combat the idolatry. Idolatry is a serious problem. And here in this book, we find repeated warnings against idolatry, because the people are about to move into the land of Canaan. And the land of Canaan is the land of the Canaanites, the Amorites live. And these people are idolaters, just like the rest of the ancient Near East. And they are warned over and over again against idolatry. For example, look in chapter 4, again, that we read part. Look in chapter 5, verses 6 through 10. Look in chapter 7. So notice how often it appears, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 7, 1 through 5. Let's read it just briefly now, chapter 8. I'm going to read just a few verses in chapter 8, verses 19 to 20, to give you an idea of a recurring theme. Chapter 8, 19 to 20. Look also chapter 12, chapter 13. All of these chapters remind the people of Israel, avoid idolatry. So again, we're looking now at 8, 19 to 20. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish, because you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Over and over again, a recurring theme is, do not commit idolatry. Do not go after other gods. If you go after other gods, you forfeit the covenant. You are under the curse. Another thing that we see in this book is the comprehensiveness of the laws of God. Again, as you look at the laws of God, especially from chapter 12 to 26, but also look chapters 5 to 11, but especially those specific stipulations from 12 to 26, you will see that there's a comprehensiveness in the laws of God. The laws of God, just like in the book of Leviticus, where you have all these laws of purity, they show us that God is concerned about our whole life, not just about small parts, not just about the time when you go to worship, when you go to the tabernacle. God is concerned about your whole life. And of course, the book ends, and perhaps you know, the book ends with what we call a succession of leadership. So toward the end of the book, the last few chapters is going to deal especially with the succession of leadership. So first of all, it's going to tell us that Joshua is going to take over the mantle from Moses. Then there we're going to have a couple of songs. We're going to have a Song of Moses in chapter 31 and part of 32. The Song of Moses is very important. That's a very important poem, and especially important for the understanding of the Pentateuch. Also, we have chapter 33, where we have the blessings of Moses in the succession part, where the people of Israel are supposed to learn these songs. And these songs are much easier to learn, of course, than learning the whole Torah. We have to understand that most people did not have access to the Torah. Many people maybe didn't even know how to read. But many people could learn these songs of Moses and even the blessings. And this song of Moses and these blessings is something that is reminding again the people about who they are, who their God is, and what they're supposed to do. And then the book ends with chapter 34 with the death of Moses. This is how the book of Deuteronomy ends. And this is how the Pentateuch ends. So notice again that the Pentateuch can be thought of as partial fulfillment, because now we are at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. And as we are at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, again, you have to ask yourself about those 4 major promises that God made to Abraham. As you remember, what was it? Was it land? It was land. It was descendants. It was a special relationships, and it was a blessing to all nations. But now we're at the end of Deuteronomy, and Moses died, the great prophet. Sure, the succession has been assured. We have Joshua, but the people are not in the land. Yes, there are many of them. The people have multiplied, that's true. Yes, they have a special relationship with God because God doesn't give up on them. He's faithful to them and helps them get to this point. But again, Israel is not yet a blessing for all nations. So we find ourselves At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, with some of the promises not being fulfilled, it is partial fulfillment, but we're ready to enter now into what is called the prophetic books. And next time we will do an introduction to the former prophets. Thank you for your attention. Please focus on the book of Deuteronomy, read it carefully, memorize the verses, and take a look at the discussions and the readings. Thank you.